when things are going well, because like there's so many ups and downs, and so like you're gonna feel the downs. So you have to make sure that when something's going well, you allow yourself to feel the up. You allow yourself to feel happy about like, oh yeah, we did that. And that's really cool. Because like tomorrow's gonna be terrible, right? So like give yourself a moment to enjoy it.
All right, William, please give us a quick lowdown of what are you currently building with Buoyant. It has been a long time. Where did it all start? And just tell us like we're a 6-year-old, please.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Buoyant. We are in the software infrastructure space, and especially in the world of Kubernetes. So if you're doing anything that's like cloud computing or kind of modern software development, you're running it on this system called Kubernetes. And we build a bunch of infrastructure software that helps you operate those systems better. So we're most famous for an open source project called Linkerd, which is a service mesh, which, I'm happy to explain what that is.
Please do.
Are in Kubernetes ecosystem, you've heard of it. If you're not, then like probably it's, you've never heard of it. But the other thing that we're working on more recently is infrastructure for serving inference. So generative AI. How do you actually run those models yourself in your environment? Not sending the tokens out to, Anthropic or whatever, but you actually want to like power your application by running inference. So those are kind of the two things that we're doing.
So that would also mean, for example, now with NVIDIA coming out soon with their laptops, like the NVIDIA Spark laptops, which you can up to 128 gigs of VRAM. Would that then be also some of the targets, or in general more Apple with the bigger chips? Or do you mean
for
more?
Us, yeah, for us, it's more like companies where we have like a ton of GPUs and we're trying to serve, we built a product that uses inference as
like
part
Replicate?
of its
Like Replicate, for example, or some of these, like Open Router?
Yeah. Like any, I think we're starting to see some of that today. Like most of the AI usage today in my world, it's developers using Claude or Codex or whatever, and like writing code, right? But people are increasingly building those capabilities into their applications. Sometimes in like a very surface level way, like, oh, we've got a little, chat widget that pops up and says, hey, can I help you? And like now you get to talk to the computer. But more interestingly, in kind of deeper ways, like the core application logic is using inference to do something. And that's where we come in. There's many ways, like if you have a laptop and you want to run a model, like there's many ways of doing that. There's Ollama and VLM and, whatever, llama.cpp or whatever. There's 100 ways of doing that. Really, the infrastructure stuff comes in when I've got, 100 GPUs or even 10 GPUs, and I'm trying to decide, how do I send traffic between these two? I've got all this traffic coming in, all these requests. Which one do I target, right? And what happens when I run out of capacity? How do I do failover? And what happens if one is slow? And all of those problems are our bread and butter.
William, I saw that you were before you started with Linkerd, or before you created it, you were working at Twitter, and I'm assuming that's also part of the background story, how you actually created it. What was the biggest infrastructure disaster that you experienced at Twitter that you were like, hell, I need to create this?
Yeah, I mean, I was there 2010, was when I started. So that was a time where the whole site was a disaster. It had so much traffic. It was falling over all the time. There was a World Cup I think it was summer of 2010, where every time there was a goal, Twitter would like fall over because everyone was tweeting, goal, right? Like you'd see things like that. And so the kind of the story of Twitter's infrastructure over the next couple of years, next 3 or 4 years, was really interesting because we got to the point where that wasn't happening anymore, but we had to re-architect that site from scratch. And the way that happened formed the basis of everything we do at Buoyant.
So what language are you using for doing that? I saw online that you're using Rust, and what made you choose Rust versus something else?
Yeah, so today we, if you look at something like Linkerd, which is a very mature project at this, at this point, there's kind of two components to Linkerd. There's a control plane component and there's a data plane component. And the way this software works is when you're running an application on Kubernetes, a data plane is actually a series of these tiny little proxies. We call them micro proxies, we embed in every replica of your application. In Kubernetes terms, we will inject a sidecar proxy in every pod. And that's the data plane. So the data plane is like, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of these little micro proxies. And then there's a control plane that coordinates that behavior and that talks to the Kubernetes API and kind of makes the system as a whole work. And so for the data plane, we chose Rust. We were one of the earliest adopters of Rust at scale. I think so. This was 2018 when we made that choice. So Rust had just hit 1.0 as a language. So prior to that, the language itself was changing all the time. And at that point, the underlying network infrastructure or ecosystem, how do you write a proxy server in Rust? Very, very immature. So we had to spend some time, sponsoring a bunch of those early ecosystem projects. Today, things like Tokyo and H2 and Hyper that form the core of a lot of Rust applications that have to talk to the network. Those things were at a very nascent state back then, and we had to invest, money and time and hire and fund these projects. But the reason we chose Rust, despite that, was because it was clear to us that the world of C and C++ was not really viable for what we wanted to do. So
Why?
C and C++, they give you ultimate systems performance, right? You can get the computer to be as fast as possible, but they have one big flaw, which is they are impossible for human beings to write securely. If you look at any C or C++ application, whenever there are bugs, it's memory management. There's doing that kind of manual memory management is why there's CVEs. It's why there's buffer overflow exploits. All of the worst problems in software. If you go back to the core, the majority of them, it's 80%, according to Microsoft and Google, which did 2 independent studies on this, are due to memory management. And so what Rust does is it says, okay, we're going to give you systems level performance, but we're going to ensure at the compiler itself is going to do the memory safety, and it's going to give you these guarantees that if you write a Rust program, you will not have those problems. And that was important for us in Linkerd because remember, the data plane is sitting in between every application component, and it's handling the traffic that's going, in between those components, right? In modern software, you break your software down into these different services, and the services communicate with each other. So a request will come in from the client, it'll go to A to B to C, it'll hit a database, and then it'll go back out, right? That communication that's happening, Linkerd is in the middle of that. And, that depending on what the application is, it could be financial data, it could be medical data, it could be health data. It's incredibly sensitive data. And we just could not do that with a language that we felt was inherently insecure.
So the cybersecurity aspect is much better with Rust.
You avoid, look, security is a very big topic, right? And you're only as secure as your weakest link. So I will say you will not find a memory vulnerability, a memory related vulnerability in the Linkerd data plane because we use Rust. There's a lot more you have to do to protect your system, right? But that critical thing, which by the way, if you look at C or C++ proxy, Envoy and Nginx and Apache, they're full of these things. They're full of these things, right? Because human beings cannot write those languages safely. So that's a data plane.
That's my question, because you especially started as an open source. How do you, because everybody expect it to be free and not willing to pay for it, how does it actually survive for the first years? Because I think in 2024, you decided to also offer it a paid version of it. Mm-hmm. What was the decision? And especially that's 9 years after you started.
Yeah. So let's get into that. But first, let me complete the rest of the story, which is control plane, right? The control plane, we chose Go. Go is also memory safe because it's a garbage collected language. It's not nearly as fast as Rust or C or C++, but it's fast enough. And the control plane is not in the critical path, so we can be a little slower. And the big advantage of Go, 2 big advantages. One, the Kubernetes ecosystem there, very, very rich, right? And part of what the control plane has to do is talk to Kubernetes. So that was very helpful. And then 2, it's much easier to get started with Go, right? This is before LLMs, before people were just vibe coding, whatever. A human had to learn the language. If you wanted someone to contribute to your project, they had to learn the language. Go is very easy to learn. So we tried to make that part of it, as accessible. And we said, hey, look, the proxy is always going to be complicated, right? That's very, very hard. But the control plane, much easier to contribute to. So that was the distinction we made there.
Nice. The question I have, you mentioned multiple times, humans cannot write C and C++ securely. Does that mean AI can?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know. That would be a good thing to test. I suspect that LLMs will have a lot of the same problems.
I mean,
But
they learn
I
from
will tell you
humans.
I suspect so, because ultimately they're pattern matching, and they're, kind of like emitting code the way that they've seen all the humans emit it in the past. So when I write code using write using Claude or whatever, I write it in Rust. Because I want that borrow checker in there, and I want the LLM. The LLM can do whatever it wants, but I want to have as many guarantees that are deterministic that are put in place around that code. Because the LLM ultimately it's gonna generate something A that's non-deterministic, and B that's like based on what it's seen before, right? It was trained on a bunch of code written by humans. So yeah, that's actually a good question. It'd be fun to measure that, but I suspect it will have the same classes of issues. And so Rust, that's why I use Rust.
Coming back to the question then, how were you able to finance it or float it for 9 years when it's a free project or
okay,
open source?
Great. So complete opposite end of the spectrum. Let's go there. So I have two roles. One is I'm an engineer. I've been an engineer for a long time, but I'm also the CEO. And so, in addition to telling LLMs to write code, I also hire people. Mostly I hire people to write code. So somehow I have got to pay those people, right? So there has to be like a business model in place. And you're right, with open source, there's a big part of it is you're giving, I guess you can say very roughly you're giving it away for free, but it's actually worse than that. Not only is it free, you're actually granting it with a license that allows anyone to do anything they want with it, even commercially, right? At least in my world, in the Kubernetes world, almost everything is under the Apache V2 license, right? And that license explicitly allows commercial usage. So we can produce Linkerd, and not only can, you, Lucas, use it, you could actually build a company around it, and you could build your own version of it, and that's all okay by the license, right? So you have to enter into that pretty open-eyed, right? You got to be aware of that. So how do we make money? In our case, we make money in a very common way, which is we produce an enterprise version of Linkerd, and we put certain features in the enterprise version, and we don't put them in open source. And that's how most of these companies have found. That's the balance that they found. So the question is, what features, right? What do you put in one? Because you can do this poorly or you can do this well.
It's very hard to do.
Yeah, it is. But there is an approach, and it's the one we use, and it's the one that I like, which is things that are core engineering benefits, scalability, reliability, security. Those have to be in open source. The project, regardless of how you use it, has to be secure, has to be reliable, has to be scalable. It has to be a good piece of software. What do people want to buy? Well, you're not selling to humans, right? You're selling to humans. You're not selling to individuals, right? Yeah. You're not selling to, this is, Mark is trying to buy Linkerd, and he's like, okay, well, should I spend $5 on this, or, do I want to buy a latte instead, right? You're selling to companies, and companies have a very different decision-making process because they know they're going to spend money no matter what, right? They're either spending money on a bunch of engineers to write the software, or they're spending a bunch of money on engineers to maintain the software and to run it, or they're spending a bunch of money on vendors. So one way or another, they know that they're spending money. And they care about a very specific set of things. They care about compliance. They care about, making sure they're following the law. They care about making sure they have a really strong security posture. They care about, things like, oh, I've got multiple teams, and the teams all use the same thing, but the teams need to make sure that they can't step on each other's toes. Right? There's a set of features that companies really care about that you as an individual developer don't really care about. And those are the things that you put in the enterprise version. And if
You
you can
did
do
that.
that right, then you get the best of both worlds.
Did you do that right from the beginning, or was it something that you did later?
We did not do a great job of it in retrospect. I think probably every software company with an open source component will say that, So we did it a little, we made that distinction a little too late in the game. I would have rather have planned that out a little better. But we did do it. We got to it eventually. And now we have a very healthy, and successful business, as well as a healthy and successful open source project.
I would love for you to walk us through that journey and how you had these key learnings in the process of, okay, shit, what are the key features that we put out? Because that's the thing, if your open source project is too good, nobody's gonna buy the premium, and like now you have it figured out, right? But the process to get there and maybe some of the missteps, I would love to hear that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. And I've given a bunch of talks about this and stuff, because I think Buoyant is pretty. I think we're pretty unique in the CNCF ecosystem in that a lot of the open source there comes from very, very big companies. It comes from IBM and Google. They're making a shit ton of money, but they're making it from other things, right? They're not making it from the open source. And we're one of the small companies, and a lot of companies like us don't make it, right? It's a very hard thing to do, but we're one of the small companies that has actually been successful at producing an open source project and having, paid maintainers and a healthy business and like a economic engine that funds that project. So I think the key insight is you have to understand how your software is bought and who the user is. And everything that I'm going to say is very specific to the type of software that we produce. If we were making a JavaScript library, it would be totally different, right? JavaScript library, the audience is JavaScript users and they're developers, and like probably you get a lot of PRs, and are you going to get a developer to pay $5? Like probably not, right? But the software that we use, it's used by companies ultimately, right? And it's not by devs, it's by SREs and operators, and like platform teams. These are not people who are writing the core application. What they're doing is they're building out a platform. And really what they want out of life, they don't want a JavaScript library that like has the right API calls. They want something that they can run, and then they don't have to worry about it, and they can move on to the next thing. All right. So once you understand that, you're like, okay, so the thing that we need to solve is how do we make Linkerd really, really simple, really solid, so you can run it and walk away. Okay, so that's where we started, right? And then we were like, well, we'll just sell support contracts, right? Like that's the standard advice, right? We'll make this open source thing. And then when a company buys it, they're going to want support because like, oh, that's what companies do, and they're looking for insurance. And that was the advice we got. So that's what we did. And we did sell support for a while. And what we found was that a lot of companies would buy a year of support, and then they would say, actually, Linkerd works great. We never had to, right? So we're just going
to
to
good. You guys
I don't think we
good.
need it, right? Yeah, and that was a big wake-up call, because what I learned from that is that selling support works if you have a complicated project that needs a lot of support. So if you have something where, like Hadoop, I think is an example. Probably no one knows what Hadoop is.
What is Hadoop?
Days.
Quick.
It's a data, it's like a data processing framework for doing like massive amounts of data. This was big, 15 years ago. And there were companies like Hortonworks and Cloudera that were built on top of this. But Hadoop was a project that, was very complex and required like a lot of, and like it evolved organically. It started as an open source project, and like open source people contributed, and, engineers are like excited about adding stuff, but they're not always making this like very principled long-term design and things like that. But for Linkerd, we started out saying, hey, we need Linkerd to be really simple, and like you should be able to install it and walk away, right? And we had gotten to the point where now the better we made Linkerd, the harder it was for us to make money, right? Okay, so that's like that's a moment where you're staring down the barrel of a gun. Like, why am I even here? Why have I done this, right? Like, so we had two choices. One is we could like make Linkerd worse, and like I wasn't about to do that. Or we could figure out a different business model. And so the next business model is basically open core, right? You find the features that you think buyers are going to pay for, and then you put those in the enterprise distribution. And again, that's complicated. And so I went through a period there where I thought our buyers were going to start with, I thought this was going to be like what they call bottom up adoption. It's going to be a bunch of SREs, and they're going to like, yes, I would pay like $10 a month, to have like a fancy dashboard or something like that. So we built this whole SaaS dashboard and really got very little traction. And meanwhile, the whole time, people were telling us, hey, I really want to buy, like people would come into the sales funnel and be like, hey, I really want to buy Linkerd. And I'd be like, you idiot. Like, Linkerd's open source, but you can buy our SaaS thing for $7 a month. And they'd be like, I don't really want that. And I was like, really? It's just $7. I don't really want that. I want to buy Linkerd. Oh, just use the open source. Right. And then finally, I put two and two together, and I was like, okay, we need to sell the enterprise version of Linkerd. And so that's what we do today. And that, of course, I say it very simply, but it took a lot of pain and suffering to get there. And then once we had that decision, we had to figure out, okay, what are the features in there? What are the aspects that companies will pay for, right? Ultimately, the buyer for us is the platform team in a company, right? And that's an enterprise purchasing decision. Very, very different from Mark deciding to buy a coffee, yes or no, $5, or $8, I guess. Right? This is like, we're going to spend a lot of time evaluating this thing, and we're going to sign up for, a long time period, and the price point is going to be really, really high. So it's a very specific type of sales mechanism. And once you understand that and you hire people who are good at that, now you have the beginnings of a functioning business.
How would you come up with this process, like that? What features to put in there? Because you said at first you had to put one and two together, but then in the other hand, like, did you do interviews more, like direct interviews, or how did you listen to your customers? Because at the beginning, like, you weren't listening in the sense of, hey, we want to buy this, but at that point, you're like, okay, I guess there is something. How did you go actually have like focus groups or?
Yeah, we did. We did a whole lot of conversations. I think and that was okay. It wasn't great because the people who we could talk to were the SREs. They were the platform engineers. They were the Kubernetes nerds, right? They were not the purchasers. So we could ask them, but they were kind of like playing a game of telephone, because often they didn't know. They were like, I don't know. Like, I told the boss we should pay for support, or like, I like you guys. I want to pay you, but like, I don't know how. Like, they literally didn't know how to convince their company to pay for us. And I was like, okay, well, we'll learn what we can. Honestly, a lot of it just came from listening to people who came in wanting to buy, versus like kind of the open source users, looking at what other similar products we're doing, and then just being a little mercenary around, like, is this a thing that a company would pay for? Yes or no? If yes, don't put it in the open source. Like, of course we want open source to be better, but the whole project is going to die, if we don't have like an economic engine behind it, right? We're not Google, we're not IBM. So like, if this thing doesn't generate money, it's going to die. So yeah, a lot of it was just trial and error, and reading between the lines of what people were saying.
With the open source, have you seen any locked-in effects? For example, I was just had to think about NVIDIA's CUDA core, right? The software that they had, CUDA, and they just like released it open source, and then more and more people used it for AI. And then years later, now they're seeing a login effect that nobody else, like for example, AMD, they can also bring out chips, but if everybody's building on CUDA, you have an effect like just like protective mode. Is it similar? Or is it not something you can see?
I think there's always inertia to not wanting to change products, but I actually don't. I think it's less about the code, especially with LLMs and things like that, right? Like, you can have your agents like rewrite the code from one language to another, if you have the money to pay for the tokens. I think it's more, again, when a company buys a piece of software, they're doing a couple of things. One is they're buying those capabilities, but they're also, they're working it into their business processes. and they're building a vendor relationship, and they're like assigning some of the risk to you, right? Like they're saying, okay, this company is going to deliver this thing, and like, they've guaranteed us based on the contract that they're going to do that. So those are the things that tend to lock you in more, I think, than like the technology side. At least this might be specific to my world, because everything in Kubernetes, is pretty well designed, and it's pretty interchangeable. So really, you lock. I guess my theory is like, you should lock people in by having like a better product, and if you can do that, then like you don't have to like come up with some Machiavellian scheme, to like trick them into using your language or whatever. You just have to have a better product, and everything else will follow.
William, you still have your CEO hat on right now. So my question is, what did your investors, like the investors, first see when you raised your first round in Linkerd? Or
What do they see?
yeah, exactly. Like why? Because in it with open source, always the question is like, hey, this might not be making money at the beginning. So what were you think? What was the ones that you really believed that convinced them in the end?
They saw a handsome, visionary CEO, and they didn't even care what I was going to do. They were like, "Name your price." No, I think
Love the answer, by the way.
it's like you need to find the investors who understand open source, and there has been a lot of money that's been made from open source, and a lot of money that's been made from infrastructure. And you can find investors who don't understand that, and they're like, "Yeah, why would I pay money for anything and give it away for free? That's crazy." And then you can find other investors who understand very much like the way that those projects can really escalate. And so we found the investors who understood and appreciated open source. And so for them, they were like, yeah, great, makes sense. Like go get traction. That's your job right now, is go get traction, get people using the project. And if you can do that, if you can't do that, then like there's no point in doing anything else. So that's your job. And that was kind of like the early slides.
Because I've seen Y Combinator, yes, they ultimately, like the last 2 or 3 years, they're always like asking for more and more open source projects. But like you raised it in 2014 slash 2015. So I was like, okay, that is very, very early, in, especially with open source. So that's why I was wondering.
I mean, even back then, open source was very big. Like there were, that was like in the days of Docker, for example. So even in kind of the containerization space, when we raised, Docker was like going through the roof. So it's it wasn't, we weren't doing anything that was really weird from that perspective. People could apply that same model.
I saw that one of your investors is also Google indirectly. Was it? And you also mentioned there the big big dogs in also the game. Was there something that you like made you feel a little bit weird about that, or you like how is that? How does that work? How
No,
does
I
it work?
liked it.
You liked
I
it?
liked it.
Why? I would
Yeah.
love to hear that.
Well, because at the time, I guess still, Linkerd competes with a big, bloated, slow project called Istio that only idiots use. That's produced by Google, and so I thought it was great to take some money from Google to compete against that, and that was about that's kind of like the extent of it.
Oh, okay, awesome. So it's not necessarily that they have any impact on your day to day. It was just like it's money. I'll take money and take money from their project and okay. Because I have no idea like how
it's like a drop in the bucket, right? Google makes, even back in 2015, they were making hundreds of millions of dollars every day. So what they invested in us was like a lot of money by my standards, but for them, it's like they could
a rounding
like a
error.
Drop. Right. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was fascinated by that. I was like, how is that in general? Like your journey from how did it work from you working for Twitter to actually starting it? Like, were you always entrepreneurial on a personal level, or like what were you thinking? Like, okay, what made you go entrepreneurial? Because for us, for example, when we started our first business, we're like, look, and honestly, I would love to be start a gaming business back in 2018. And be like, look, I don't want to work for. I have this great idea. I want to do it, and I don't want to work for anyone else. This is just something I need to do right now. Was this something also for you?
I've always been entrepreneurial, or I've always had that idea in my head that I wanted to start a company. I worked at a lot of startups, and the whole time I was like, I feel like I could do a better job than these guys. Like so. and Twitter, when I started, I was like, oh, this is a big company. It's 200 people when I started, um, and they were like, oh, we're a startup. And I was like, I don't know if that really is a startup. And then by the time I left, I think it was like 3,500 people or something
Wow.
crazy. Um, so I always knew I wanted to do something, but I wanted to, um, like I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. And what was very helpful in my time at Twitter was I saw some big transformations that took place within the company that, I was a part of and I got to witness. And there was like it was like clear to me how to at least tell a story of like, oh, actually, I think the rest of the world is going to need this too. Right. And those are the interesting opportunities, I think, at least for, like B2B businesses. If you're B2C, it's like a little weirder, right? Like B2C has these different dynamics where what's going to make someone, use your app over someone else's, like you can go viral and stuff like that. That happens to some extent in like B2B, but not nearly as much. So B2B, it's more like, hey, do you have some insight that like you've developed that actually no one has really kind of like figured out yet? And that's the direction you can go. And then if you're right, then great. And if not, then not.
And especially convincing somebody to switch to the software, because people normally tend to be locked in for years in B2B, whereas B2C people are just, you know what?
Right.
I'm not using Claude anymore right now. I'm using ChatGPT.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and the analogy I use for something like Linkerd is we're not an Apple Watch. We're like a pacemaker. Both things can monitor your heart rate, right? But Apple Watch, you put it on and like, okay, and like if you don't like it, you take it off, right? Pacemaker, that thing's going in and it's not coming out, right? And like it's hard to get in there, right? You have to really need it. It's not like a thing you just try out. You need to really need it, and once it's in there, then like you really depend on it. And I think that's a pretty good comparison, right? Like Apple Watch, it's a consumer product. You make a very different set of decisions, and you treat that purchase as very different from purchasing a pacemaker.
Your entrepreneurial journey is already longer than ours, obviously. The question I have is for you: what were the biggest wins for you personally in that journey and the hardest hardships? Like for us, for example, last year we sold the project. It was a great feeling, but there were still other ones that felt in the long run better than just selling a project. What was it for you that you were like, I'm on top of the world, or man, I'm eating glass and looking into the abyss?
Yeah, I think every entrepreneurial journey has both of those. Of course, raising money, you feel like early on, like seed money, right? You raise your seed round on like an idea or something, you feel incredible. You're like, wow, someone's giving me millions of dollars. Wow, I don't even have $100 in my bank account, and like suddenly I have millions of dollars. Right? That's an amazing feeling. Of course, that quickly gets turned into dread because like every month that number goes down, and you're like, oh gosh. And then the second raise is harder, and the third raise is harder, and like pretty soon fundraising is like not a fun activity. It's like a thing that you dread. Um, but I think also, for us, there were long periods of time at Buoyant where I was like, gosh, does this company really make sense? Like, are we really doing something? Like I've convinced all these people to come join me, and it's been years now, right? Because we're like a company that's been around for a while. I would like to have given them all yachts by now. Like I would have liked to have given them like a glorious exit. Um, and that's still in our future. But you have to manage your own psychology as an entrepreneur, right? And like the role you have to play, especially to employees and to investors, is like you need to keep focused on the kind of optimistic view of the future, but not in an unserious way, right? Like you have to like be able to paint that picture of like, okay, here's where we are today, and like of course nothing ever goes as planned. You always get punched in the face a few times, but here's what we've learned, here's what we've accomplished, and like here's the thing where I think we can really make a difference. And sometimes you don't want to like paint that picture, right? Sometimes internally you're like, I just want to like go to bed right now. I just want to like put the blanket over my head or the pillow, have someone put the pillow over my head. But you have to play that role, right? And that can be tough.
What were some mental models that helped you do this? Because I want to go into detail. I love it. Tips and tricks from other entrepreneurs, how they manage these situations, because it's a roller coaster ride.
I have mental models. I don't think so. I tend to be a pretty stubborn person. So sometimes I'm just like, fuck it, I'm not going to give up. Like, well, yeah, this sucks, but like, I'm going to keep doing it. Yeah, I don't know if that's healthy though, but like that was my approach. I think also personally, I have a family, I have a wife and kids who love me, and or at least they say so. They that helps a lot. Like having that support layer, especially if you can like take a moment to like put the work stuff on hold and just be, a family guy for a while or family woman or whatever. That helps. That helps a lot. But yeah, I don't know if I have a great answer to that. Like, I don't know if I did it the right way. I'm just stubborn.
I think there's no right way. I think everybody needs to find the right way for themselves, because in the end, it's like everybody deals different with situation. I think the most important part is that you're enjoying also the journey, because people are always in a haste trying to get to the goal. May it be the $1 billion exit or whatever it is, $1 billion valuation. But the biggest problem is there. If you're not enjoying the way there or in building something with your friends or people you enjoy working with, you lost 10, 20 years of your life. And looking backwards, you're just like, what did I actually spend my time on?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's actually a really good point, is you have to be, and this is something that I learned, you have to, when things are going well, because like there's so many ups and downs. And so like you're going to feel the down. So you have to make sure that when something's going well, you allow yourself to feel the up. You allow yourself to feel happy about like, oh yeah, we did that. That's really cool. Because like tomorrow is going to be terrible, right? So like give yourself a moment to enjoy it.
I think honestly, you said that your answer before wasn't that good, but I think there was something that underneath that was really good, because I think it's about pillars in life. You have the personal life, like where you have your hobbies, maybe, then your family life, and your work life, right? If you have two pillars that are stable, the third one will keep up. Doesn't matter if it's crumbling, because you have the other two, which are a healthy family, that can hold up the rest. So I think this is one of the things that is a true insight in the day. That's what I noticed also in my life. If I have two stable pillars, that doesn't matter if the other one is currently crumbling or not, because
so you're saying like if you're sitting on a stool and it's got 3 legs and one of those legs crumbles, you're still okay?
No, it's not a stool. I'm thinking about a house. They always have how they're like a house with 3. It doesn't matter if you have 3; it's still fine. It'd still be good. Well,
I feel like you should have 4. You need 4 pillars and then one.
You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking about what they always have for banks, like when they like the caricatures, the old Roman pillars, and then there's 2, and then they have a triangle on top. It doesn't matter. They're centered in the middle. If you fall, one of them crumbles, it'll still be fine. That's how it works. Like the math, that works. The other one, you're right. A stool with 2 legs is not gonna work.
I guess you need a 2-dimensional object, and you're okay.
Or let's say you have 4 pillars, then, and one crumbles. Doesn't matter. You have 3 left.
Yes, yeah, that feels safer. The 4th pillar is alcohol.
Exactly. For me, it's gym that works also.
Oh, the gym. That's a much better answer.
But to each their own. If it's the alcohol for you, hey.
No. That's not. Whoever's listening, like that's not a serious suggestion. Not a good solution.
What do you think that most people misunderstand about open source projects?
Well, there's many different types of open source projects. So I guess there's 2 things. One is that, there's very many different types, and what works well for one type will not work for another. For example, what works well for something like the Linux kernel, that's a very specific type of project. You can compare what that looks like with something like, I don't know, what's another example, like Node. What works well there, or Ruby or Python, right? Like those are all open source projects. And what works well for those things is very different from works well for Kubernetes, right? And for Linkerd. So one, I think you have to really understand what the dynamics are. I was always like a little befuddled early on with Linkerd why we didn't have contributors, or I mean, we had some, but we didn't have like hundreds or thousands. And finally, I realized, okay, the people who use Linkerd, they're not developers, they're platform owners. So like, they don't really want to write code. Their job isn't writing code. Their job is like configuring systems and writing YAML and things like that. So once I realized that, then okay, and then I think number two, and this is one, and this might be a little specific to my space, but people have very strong senses of entitlement when it comes to open source sometimes, right? Like you get this thing and you're like, oh, it's free. Okay, great. I'm going to start using it. And then like you find a problem and you report the problem and you're like, hey,
wow.
like guys, it's been like, 24 hours. What are you idiots doing? Like, when is this going to be fixed? And, if you're on the other side of it, you're like, whoa, like, first of all, like using this thing for free. And second of all, like, I don't owe you anything. Like, why are you acting like this? So like, and so you kind of, and, some of this is human behavior, right? Like, William Morgan's second law of human behavior is that the human level of entitlement rises to like whatever's provided to you for free plus like 10%, right? So like people will naturally feel entitled to whatever they have access to, and you have to like sometimes you have to like really reset those expectations for people, and you have to realize that, and this is maybe the other thing to learn is the vast majority of open source today, certainly in my ecosystem, but I think probably more, around the world, it's done for commercial purposes. Someone's paying you to work on that project. It's very rare. It's not zero, but it's very rare to find projects these days that are truly volunteer driven, nights and weekends. They're out there for sure, but the vast majority of open source, there's a corporate interest in there. And so when I grew up with Linux, it was a grassroots thing. We were like, we're going to take down Microsoft, right? Like this was like the thing. And it felt so good to run it on your computer and be like, yeah, no, I don't have to pay anyone. And like, I spent my nights and weekends like trying to contribute, like device drivers and stuff like that. But that was kind of the origin of a lot of open source. But the dynamics today are very different, especially in the Kubernetes and the cloud native space. Everyone who's there is paid to be there. They're either like paid to work on a project, or they're paid by their company to evaluate projects to use to bring into the ecosystem. So you can't ignore that aspect. You can't be like, oh, well, we're here and like we're all one happy community of volunteers working for the greater good. No, you're all paid. You're all paid to be here. So like, let's just, be very upfront about that, and I had to kind of like be a jerk about that for a while in the cloud native space, because it does bill itself as a community and we're community efforts, and and everyone had a very strong when we started commercializing Linkerd, and we were like, no, here's the set of things we're not going to do in open source. We, Buoyant, this corporate company, are going to ask you to pay money if you want XYZ. Very strong reaction from
that was
community.
2024.
Like,
when is that?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. And so we made some changes then, and people were like, this is like open source and name only, and how dare you, and like this is not true open source, and you can, we're gonna kick you out of the CNCF and stuff. And it was just like, it was people who first of all had never used Linkerd at all, so they were just like, white knighting and like taking on the mantleship of open. And second of all, everything they said was wrong, right? Like that literally is like, all of this is open source. Like that's what the Apache license allows you to do, is for any corporate entity to basically do whatever they want with the thing. And if you don't like, and third of all, if you don't like it, then you have a great solution, which is you go do it, right? It's all open source. Take the project Google and like do the things.
I think it's the virtual signaling, what most of these people do. And also in general, I feel like most people who don't pay for a product complain much more than the people who actually pay for a product.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's definitely true.
Which is completely weird, because the people who are paying or actually paying more should have the right, or should at least feel like they have the right to complain and stuff like this. But normally they do not.
But this is an experiment for you to run, which is like take something you don't want, like a table, right, and put it on. I don't know what you use, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. Put it on the free section, and then do the same thing, but put it on like paid, but like $5 or whatever. The quality of responses will be very, very different between those two.
Yeah. Yeah, I
You
mean,
will see a lot more entitlement and like demands and like crazy stuff on the free section than the I want you to pay even $2.50.
Can you bring it to me or stuff like this? Like,
right? Yeah,
and I'm offering, I'm like shipping as well. I'm like, this is for free. This table is.
Yeah, and if you don't like it, just I'll come pick it up and return it. Is there anything else you'd like me to do? Right? And it's exact same dynamics with open source. So yeah, that's right.
I still have to think about what you said earlier, that you guys are doing it now for like replicate not replicate, but other ones in the AI space, that you're building that. What's the name of the product that you're building for them right now? Is that still with Flickr or is it, what is it called?
It's a secret.
It's not released yet.
Not released yet.
Oh, I'm so excited. Is there already, can you talk about it a little bit, or?
Yeah.
Please do. I would love to know a little bit more about it.
So the core challenge I want to solve is, how do you run these models yourself? And how do you run them in the context of, I'm building a platform, for my application, and the application is going to use inference as like part of what it does, right? So distinct use case from, I'm running Claude and like I'm a developer, right? This is like my application does stuff with LLMs. Okay, if you don't have a lot of traffic, you can just send that out to whatever, together.ai or Bedrock or whatever, and like you can just pay, hey, here's some tokens, 50 cents a token for 1 million tokens of input and $4 for 1 million tokens of output, right? You can do that. But at some point, you're going to want to run these models yourself, because A, the economics are not going to make sense to continue to outsource that. B, you might have governance or compliance issues why you can't send that traffic out anyways. Like if you're a medical application or something, you might not even be able to send that data outside of your environment. C, you want to own, if this is truly critical to your application, you want to own as much, you want to control this thing as much as possible. So you don't want to have a dependency on some third party service. So there's all these reasons why you want to do that. Okay, so if you want to do that, well, you're doing it across multiple machines, multiple GPUs, multiple machines. Okay, how do you do that, right? How do you do that in a way that doesn't fall over? How do you do that in a way that has kind of guaranteed levels of performance? These are all hard systems problems that no one has really solved yet. People have gotten very good at like, I'm going to build this like, I'm going to run my GLM 5.2 across my bank of like 32 H200s and like, look how fast I can make it go. But like, that's very different from, I want to serve inference at scale in a way that's reliable, in a way that I can monitor, in a way that's predictable, in a way where I can fail over if things go wrong. So all of that's, the kind of the substrate there is inference serving, but the actual problem space, those are all systems problems. And that's exactly the stuff that Buoyant has been solving for 10 plus years.
So this would be then, what is the difference that what you're building to what is Replicate currently using, for example?
What are they currently using?
Yeah, I don't know. So Replicate is, for example, they're hosting a lot of models, etc. Right? So I don't know how they're doing this. What is the difference what you're building to what's currently the status? Let's put it this way, status quo.
Yeah, I think that the focus is on what do you need to do this within the context of a company. So, for example, you might have different levels of traffic, right? You might have different kind of like QoS levels, right? We've got some batch traffic, we've got some agentic traffic, we've got some interactive traffic. Okay, well, how do you prioritize that? You've got like 10 GPUs or 100 GPUs at these traffic levels. How do you make sure that the interactive ones get back to the user as quickly as possible? The batch ones maybe can take longer, right? So that's a scheduling problem. How do you ensure that different teams within an organization can configure things in the right way? And maybe different teams get different rate limits, right? Like, how do you configure that, and how do you apply that? How do you add things like PII redaction or like prompt injection detection, in a way that makes sense, so that like your team isn't opening up these unexpected exploits. You're right. These are all things that enterprises want to control and configure and make sure that they don't go wrong. Because remember, they're not just trying to solve software; they also have to like follow all these regulatory compliance rules and like all these security things, and all of that gets mixed into the core infrastructure problem of how do I serve inference traffic.
And this would be then for all kind of models. So I could run Claude, the newest Claude version, like Fable or whatever it is. Okay.
Yeah, I think usually companies have a specific model that they want to run, and I don't want to prescribe that. You figure
Yeah.
out what you want. Like maybe it's something that you've trained or fine-tuned with LoRa or whatever, or maybe this is just you've taken whatever Gemma 4 off the shelf and you're trying to run it. I actually don't care. My job is to make sure that you can build a platform around it where you can say something like, okay, what I care about is TTFT, right? Time to first token. My P95 TTFT has got to be less than 1 second. So like, how do I do capacity planning to do that? And how do I do auto scaling so that if more traffic comes in, then I can do that, even though VLM takes like 15 minutes to start up, like all of those things, that's all part of building a reliable internal platform. And none of that's there. I mean, it's there in bits and pieces, but it's all complicated
What do
and
you
wrong.
think currently in the AI infrastructure? What is the AI infrastructure failure that is coming currently and that people are not prepared for? Because I mean, you're building right now for basically the AI infrastructure for big companies to run it locally. Like, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think they're not prepared for?
I don't know if this is something I'm not prepared for, but what I think is going to change is that I think GPU prices are going to drop pretty significantly. Right now, there's crazy scarcity, right? Like if you go to AWS and you're just like, hey, I want an on-demand, like H1 machine with H100 on it, or let's say H200. Like you just can't get it. You can't get it. Like zero. Oh, you go to the third-party marketplace. You can't find one that like if you want to run GLM 5.2, your minimum config is 8 H200s. You got to find a machine that does that. Zero are available on demand right now. I think it's all going to change. And then the cost of all the crazy token costs that people are paying now, there's going to be a really viable alternative, which is like, let's just run these things ourselves. So
Nice.
are they prepared for that? I don't know, but like I'm prepared for that.
That's the most important part. So you're betting on that. I like it.
Yeah.
So where do you see Boeing in the next 10 years?
I'll be on this podcast. We'll be 20 years
36.
old. Uh, I'll be talking for my yacht, for my second yacht. Yeah, I don't know. I'm. It's really who can predict the future in general, but who can predict the future with the crazy
AI.
pace of AI advancements, right? Like if you're in that world, it's hard to predict what's even going to be here in like
All right.
6 weeks.
Fair enough. Let's talk about 6 weeks then. So when are you going to release the new feature, the new app or
Yeah,
project?
yeah, later this year. Later this year.
Later this year? Nice. Oh, that's super exciting. Do you guys have
Yeah.
already, what's your go-to market? Can you talk about it a little bit or?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're doing exactly what we did with Linkerd, only, hopefully better, right?
Yeah.
There's an open source component, core reliability, security, scalability, all goes into open source. And there's a set of things that are, that enterprises care about, and that goes in the enterprise version.
What are the marketing channel? Because I don't know, like B2B, do you have marketing channels already for that, or you just use your existing customer base as cross-selling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, of course, there's some existing customer base stuff. I think there's a lot of kind of like community channels that you use for getting into the hands of Kubernetes adopters. There's conferences. There's blog posts and newsletters and things like that. They're mostly around spreading awareness. You try and get a little community going around the open source and like give people a real reason to like be there and to feel good about it. Um, and then you kind of you build off of that. So it's that part of the playbook is not so new.
Mhm.
The technology is new, the problem set is new, the audience is the same, and it's just a matter of, ultimately, it's like, are you solving a problem that is real for them, and can you communicate effectively why your solution is the one that's going to solve it, without causing them more pain.
Interesting. Is there still a question that we didn't ask you yet, but you kind of wish that we did?
Gosh, you guys have really covered a lot. Let's see, we covered Linkerd. No, not really. I think we've gone on a pretty good journey. We even got into the open source versus commercial dynamics, which I don't. Usually, it's either that or the technology. I don't often talk about
We
both
love
of those.
everything. Like we said at the beginning, we love to learn about this stuff. This is new to us. We've talked to we had a guest also on it. She was talking about compute as a commodity. So it was super interesting for us to see that. And that's why it's also interesting that you say that now that none of these are available. I'm sure we'll have to get back to her and ask her, because when we had her on like 6 months ago, that was still like kind of early. So this is going to be super cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, William, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, which is embarrassing, but yeah, that's where I'm doing most of my personal content production there. And of course, if you're running Kubernetes, check out linkerd.io and let me know what you think.
Awesome. Thank you so much, William. Appreciate. Thank you for coming on the pod.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Lucas. Really appreciate you having me here.